In this video, I'm gonna redesign the Lamborghini Temerario from both the front and the rear view. And I'm also gonna let you know why I think this is an absolutely fantastic design from Lamborghini. Specifically when it comes to the proportions, because it has a clear connection to the Gallardo in very cool ways, specifically in the proportions when we look at it from a side view. Before we jump in and redesign this car, I want to show you the things that I think is lacking as well for the Lamborghini Temerario here. So here we have the Temerario up top and we have the Gallardo at the bottom. And I wanted to show you this because I want to show you here the lines here, how this is connected to the Gallardo in such a cool way. We have the same lines here, for example, in the hood. And I feel like the lower section of the Temerario down here is a clear modernization of what was going on in the Luke Donkerwolke, I do believe, designed the Gallardo down low. It feels like a clear modernization with a lot more, modern graphics. For example, this daytime run light here, which I am going to redesign just a little bit. I'm going to let you know exactly what I'm going to do to that in a minute. However, if we look at the headlights here for the new Temerario, I do think this is where this design is lacking a little bit, because it doesn't look as interesting as I would expect a Lamborghini headlight to look. And that happened as well with the facelifted Lamborghini Urus, where they just created a very thin LED and removed the Y shape, which I thought would look so much cooler. And this just has a straight cut, two parallel lines like this, and two light bulbs in the middle, and that's about it. It doesn't really have any sort of identity for the headlight in the front end, which I think is one of the key components of a Lamborghini. Another detail that I want to change here is you see how this wing goes in to very short here. It doesn't extend far enough, in my opinion, into the center portion here. I sort of want to have this be a connection with, if we just draw a line from this line up here and have that be a connection to this area here. So I'm going to move this wing forward a little, or more inwards, to create more of a smaller opening here in the front end, by having these wings sort of cut in further into that area. Now, looking at the side view here, this is the coolest view in my opinion for the new Temerario, because I think this is such a clear, the inspiration here is clearly taken from the Gallardo. I love this line that goes from the front end, goes into the rear, cutting through here, and then it sort of has a connection to what's going on in the rear because it cuts into this corner here of the cutout graphics for the rear end. Love this beautiful line. We have some elegant lines in the Temerario as well. And of course, the Lamborghini DNA having one single curvature going from the front all the way to the back, and then have this tiny little upswing in the rear end to create the send-off of the rear end design. I do like the integration of the air vents here, because this, again, it has a more classic look. There's nothing wrong with that. This is what Lamborghini used to do back in the day. And looking at this design and comparing it to the Lamborghini Gallardo down here, you can see that specifically the proportions are pretty much identical to the Gallardo. We still have the same one key curvature going up top. You can see that the air vents here as well, very much similar, very similar to what we have going on in the Temerario here. I do like this little graphic here that cuts out into the rear fender as well. I guess we can all agree that looking at it from a side view like this, you can clearly see the inspiration from the Gallardo. You even have an intake here up top on the sort of the shoulder, and you have the same intake right here on the Gallardo. I love these wheel designs of the Gallardo, by the way. It just looks great. The Gallardo to me is one of the, it's aged really well, because it might look like a complicated chisel design, but it is in fact a very simplistic design when you break it down like this in all of these lines. Now, last but not least, before we jump into the redesign, the rear end. And I think this is also inspired by the Gallardo, because we have a line up top and we have a cutout here. You can see these lines going down here. Mitja Borkert, the chief designer of the Lamborghini, said he was inspired by motorcycle designs by having the entire rear wheel exposed like this, and it also plants the car properly on the ground. But if we look at these, where can we find this specific design or treatment in the Gallardo? You can see it right here for the exhaust. So in this case, we didn't have the full exposed rear tire, but this graphic still comes back for the exhaust housing for the Gallardo. And we still have a lot of horizontal lines going on here similar to what we have in the Temerario, specifically these two lines right here, this at the bottom and this one at the center portion of the car. And the positioning of the taillights also feel like they have some inspiration to the Gallardo. Again, the Gallardo to me just one of the most beautiful looking Lamborghinis, even though personally I prefer the facelifted version when we have these thinner headlights and also the thinner taillights and also the smaller headlights in the front end. But the couple of things I want to change here. You see this line right here, this does not work well for me because this feels like an undefined curvature here where we have these ribs. I still want to have the ribs, but I want to have it in a more horizontal line. A very simple change in the rear end. I'm not going to do anything crazy for the rear end, but I am gonna just tweak around a little bit and see how that turns out. Another detail I want to change is you see this taillight here and the DRL for it, the design for it. I want to have it be a little bit more dynamic, and the only thing I'm going to do here is just add some thickness to the sides here to make it feel a little bit more interesting, because I think Lamborghini is losing that. They're creating a lot of small, thin LEDs, so instead of having it be thin like this, I just want to have a little bit dynamic feeling in the overall graphics of the design. So those are the changes that we're going to do for the Temerario. Just a couple of changes in the front, a more substantial change in the front than we're going to do in the rear, but I think it's going to look pretty cool once we're done with this redesign. Let's talk about some of the spec and tech while we redesign this Lamborghini Temerario. It has 907 horsepower. The thing about this though, you can't have a smaller Lamborghini competing with the big Revuelto. I'm not sure still which one is the fastest car here, because this does 0 to 60 in 2.7 seconds. I do believe the Revuelto might be doing it at maybe 2.5 seconds or something like that. So it has a V8 hybrid instead of the V10 of the Huracan, but it revs to 10,000 RPM, which is also going to be crazy. I hope this will still be a screamer, because we do have a lot of new regulations in Europe that prevents cars from being too loud, and that has affected specifically AMG, which used to be brutal when it comes to the sound, but now they have to dial that down a little bit. I think this has to be a screamer still though. So 2 fewer cylinders, but mates 3 electric motors to the twin turbocharged 4-liter engine, a more usable cabin with extra space and 3 large screens in the interiors. I do think the screen setup here, even though we have 3 screens, it still kind of works because they're not too obtrusive in the interior. So on its own, the V8 delivers 789 horsepower and 538 pound-feet of torque. And as I said, it revs up to 10,000 RPM. I can't wait to hear that scream in real life. So you have the V8 and you have 3 electric motors, and the Temerario's total output, as I said, 907 horsepower and 590 pound-feet of torque. It does have all-wheel drive if you need it. It's of course going to be a rear-wheel bias, this car, but it kicks in if you're starting to lose traction or something like that. It will be able to blast from 0 to 62 in 2.7 seconds, top speed about 213 miles per hour, insane. And as I said, that will rev up to 10,000 RPM. You have a set of distinct drive modes. You have Città, Strada, Sport Corsa, and Corsa Plus, along with three different settings for how to use the electric motors. You have Recharge, Hybrid, and Performance, and it also comes with a drift mode. I know the Gallardo wasn't a very easy car to drift, but since this comes with a drift mode, maybe this is easier. So you still have the Lamborghini classic start-stop button remains under a red flap, which is something that just adds some more dramatic feel when you're firing up your Lamborghini. I love that little detail. You have a launch control is activated with the press of a single button. So here now with the interior here, we do have 3 screens for the interior, which might sound like a lot, but as I said, they're very well integrated in the overall design of the interior. So you have a 12.3-inch digital gauge cluster, a passenger, which also has its own screen for checking how fast you're going, make sure you're not doing something crazy, and that is 9.1 inches right in front of the passenger. And then you have the 8.4-inch infotainment screen. So 8.4 inches today might sound like a very small screen, but to me, I just think that that's the optimal screen size, like 8 to 10 inches. Sounds perfect to me. It comes with 3 different wheel designs. One is full carbon fiber wheels. They all measure 20s in the front, 21s in the rear. We don't have any pricing details yet for the Temerario, but you can expect it to start around $290,000 and it goes on sale early 2025. So with that said, let's jump into Photoshop here. Let's check out the redesigns that I did here. So as I said, the main thing here that I wanted to do with the Temerario is just to add a little bit more of personality to the front end design. That is the key thing when it comes. When I first saw this, I thought that the front end lacked something. So it doesn't look exciting enough. I understand that if you look at the Gallardo, it has a very simplistic design for the headlights and pretty much all the graphics, the proportions is a very, very simplistic design. But since everything else, all the small details here look so modern, I do want to push the headlight design a little bit further. So that's what I did with the front end design. Also moved the fins in a little bit further inwards. I think that for some reason just adds to the width of the front end design. And I also wanted to add, like I'm going to do with the rear end, the daytime run lights, they have the same thickness going all around. And I like the shape, the hexagonal shape, but I want to add just an inch more thickness on the outer parts of the LEDs to create a little bit more dynamic feel for this design, and also different thicknesses for the new daytime run light that I'm doing here for the Temerario in the front end. And in the rear here, as I said, I didn't really want to go crazy with the redesign here, but I want to have more structure because we have this bent curvature going underneath the exhaust pipes with these ribs. What that does to me is just drag the sides of the rear end downwards. And I want to have more structure. So I want to just pop that curvature upwards and have them have a connection to the taillights, but still having those ribs continuing on from the exhaust onwards, outwards to the taillights. And that's pretty much the only change that I wanted to do in the rear end, in addition to the same thing I did with the hexagonal shape for the DRLs in the front end. Just add a little bit of thickness to the outer parts of the DRL in the rear end, and that's it. I think, in my opinion, I think these changes makes it feel like it has a little bit more personality in the graphics. I don't want to touch anything proportion-wise, because as I just showed you in the beginning, I love that it has a clear connection to the original Gallardo when it comes to the proportions, but the graphics still might need, in my opinion, a little bit of tweaking like I did here in this redesign.